There are people who spend an entire lifetime, sometimes 70 years or more, only to realize that most of the worries they carried in their minds never actually happened. But you can understand this truth in just a few minutes, simply by listening to Zen stories that have been told for hundreds of years. We live in a world where the mind never seems to stop running. From the moment we open our eyes to the moment we close them, we are constantly thinking, will I finish today's tasks on time? Did that person misunderstand me? What if I fail tomorrow? What will the future look like? These endless streams of thoughts overlap like a machine running at full speed. And instead of helping us live better, they drain our energy, fill us with anxiety, and even rob us of our sleep. Researchers estimate that more than 47% of our waking hours are spent not being present in the moment. That means nearly half of our lives slip away while we are lost in imagination, worry, and analysis of things that are not actually happening right now. And in the process, we lose touch with the life unfolding before our very eyes. What's fascinating is that thousands of years ago, Zen masters had already seen this problem. They didn't call it by scientific terms, nor did they need data or research. They simply observed human nature. The mind clings to thinking like an addict. And the more we think, the more we suffer. And to free people from this trap, they didn't use complicated theories. Instead, they told short, often puzzling, sometimes humorous stories that could cut through the endless stream of thoughts in an instant. The strange beauty of Zen stories is that they don't try to convince you with logic. Instead, they make you laugh and then fall silent. And in that silence, you suddenly realize you don't have to force your mind to solve everything. You can just let go, and life immediately feels lighter. Some people spend their whole lives before they see that their suffering was self-inflicted by thought. You, however, are about to hear words of release in just the next few minutes. If you've ever felt exhausted because your mind would not rest, if you've ever lost sleep over the same thoughts looping again and again, then stay. These three Zen stories may not give you answers, but they will give you something far more precious: silence. The kind of silence you might have been searching for all along. Modern human beings are living in an age of speed, where everything happens faster than ever before. We have technology that connects us with a single tap, endless streams of information flooding in every second, and choices so abundant that no other generation has ever experienced them. And yet, the paradox lies here. The more convenience we have, the less peace our minds seem to enjoy. The brain has become like a computer that never shuts down, constantly processing, analyzing, comparing, and judging. Today, this phenomenon has a familiar name: overthinking. Take a moment to look at yourself. How many times have you gone to bed only to find your head spinning with endless questions? Will someone judge me tomorrow? Was that decision a mistake? If I fail, what will others think? These thoughts go around in circles, offering no solution, only adding more stress. And the truth is, most of the worst-case scenarios we imagine never come to pass. Yet while they occupy the mind, they consume all our energy and rob us of peace. Recent psychological studies reveal a troubling fact. Human beings spend nearly half of their waking hours not living in the present moment. The mind either runs backward into the past with regret or leaps forward into the future with anxiety. Meanwhile, the present, the only place where life truly happens, is overlooked. Small wonder, then, that stress, anxiety, and depression are rising to record levels in modern societies, even as material wealth increases. What's fascinating is that Zen masters saw this human problem thousands of years ago. They didn't need scientific terms or diagnostic tools. They simply observed the mind directly. They saw that the root of suffering is not the external world, but the restless stream of thoughts we keep repeating to ourselves. And rather than offering complex theories or long lectures, they often responded with a short story, a sharp riddle, sometimes so humorous it made listeners laugh, and then, suddenly, fall silent. In that silence, the tangled web of thoughts would break for a moment, revealing the clarity that had always been there. The unique power of Zen anecdotes lies in their simplicity. A single phrase, a single gesture, even a question with no logical answer, can become a mirror reflecting the mind. They don't aim to explain everything, nor do they promise permanent formulas. Instead, They invite you to step outside the spinning wheel of rational analysis and notice something profoundly ordinary. You don't have to think about everything all the time. You can let go, and the world still moves on. That is why, in this video, we will step into 3 Zen stories. At first, they may sound simple, but each contains wisdom distilled over centuries. More importantly, they are not just fragments of the past, they are timeless reminders. Each story is a doorway, showing you that stopping overthinking is not about forcing the mind to be blank, but about realizing that what you're clinging to can be released, here and now. You will meet a learned scholar undone by a teacup. You will follow a young disciple chasing an answer that cannot be found. You will witness a debate that dissolves in a single sentence. And in each story, you may recognize yourself, the one who has been caught in too many thoughts, and the one who longs to be free. So let these 3 stories accompany you on the short journey ahead. There is no need to memorize them, no need to analyze them too deeply. Just listen and allow them to do their work, to awaken in you the ability to let go. Perhaps, when the stories are done, you will realize that the peace you've been searching for has never been far away. It has always been within your own mind. Story 1. The Teacup Already Full. Chapter 1. The Scholar and the Boundary. Of words. Edward arrived in Japan on a morning veiled in light rain, carrying a worn canvas suitcase and a head full of books. He was a Western scholar, well known across Europe for his essays on Eastern philosophy. His reputation had opened the doors of libraries and conferences, but not the door within his own heart. He had read every translation, compared every commentary, cited the words of long-gone masters. What he lacked was not knowledge, but something he could never put into time's new Roman type. The silence he believed Zen might give, or at least promise. The path to the small temple wound up a moss-covered hill. Stone steps were slick with rain, and red maple leaves printed their shadows across the ground. Low houses lined the village roads, and passers-by bowed with hands pressed lightly together, their silence like a rest note in a noisy symphony. Edward still clung to the habit of questioning, of probing. At every stop he exchanged a few halting words of Japanese, asking for directions to the Zen master. Every reply was a smile, a nod, a pointed finger, silence guiding the way. Passing through the temple gate, he heard rain falling on the thatched roof as though another layer of quiet had been poured into the air. The wooden gate opened to a courtyard where an ancient pine stood like a witness. The air was cool, scented with tea and ash. White curtains swayed gently, and everything here seemed to live at a slower rhythm, one with more depth than the frantic pace Edward was used to. His heartbeat quickened when a young disciple greeted him with a soft, "Irasaimasu." "You must be Edward?" the disciple asked in careful English. "You have come to see Master Saito, haven't you?" "Yes," Edward answered. "I've written about Zen for many years. I want to speak with the master, or at least receive some guidance. I believe there is something I have not understood, something no book can give." The disciple led him along polished wooden corridors, past a rock garden where dark stones sat like sleeping fish in a sea of sand. Edward's shadow stretched across the polished floor, and every sound seemed to be swallowed into stillness. "The master is in the tea room," the disciple said. "You may wait." Edward sat on the tatami mat, his suitcase by his side, and opened a yellowed book to pass the time. But his eyes struggled to hold the words. Questions buzzed in his mind. How should I ask? How to be precise enough so the answer won't slip away? More than anything, he longed for someone to show him rather than explain. Slow footsteps approached. The sliding door opened, and the figure who entered was not some radiant sage, not a dignitary. It was an old man, with a wiry frame, salt and pepper hair tied back neatly, and simple robes. His eyes glowed like embers, not sharp in judgment, but bright with the steadiness of someone who had witnessed countless changes yet remained unchanged. He bowed slightly, a modest gesture, his faint smile inviting Edward into a private story. "Edward," the master said slowly in English, his voice unhurried. "I've heard of you. You have traveled far." Edward rose quickly, flustered that his name was spoken so plainly. He stumbled through a self-introduction, outlining his books, his lectures, his nights spent parsing koans and annotations. He confessed the sensation of hitting a wall, where every explanation echoed hollow. He admitted to yearning for something direct, more real than words. The master listened without interruption. When Edward finally fell silent, the old man gestured for him to sit opposite, resting his hands on his knees as though hosting a guest at his table. "You have read much," he said. "You speak little. You wish to understand. You believe understanding is what is needed. I hear this. But before I say anything, tell me, have you eaten breakfast?" Edward blinked. "Yes, master. At the hotel," he answered, trying to sound serious. "You have eaten, yet you are still hungry," the master smiled. "Hungry in another place." He tilted his head, as if reading an invisible page. "So you come here to be given, what exactly?" Edward hesitated. This was not the time to show off erudition, but his analytical habits tugged him in. "I'm not looking for answers to a single question. People say Zen helps stop the endless spiral of useless thought. I want to know how to move from book knowledge to direct experience. Perhaps you might teach me a method, meditation, breathing." The master raised a finger to his lips, signaling silence, his smile intact. "You wish to learn silence through a method," he said. "Good. But before methods, I want to see how you hold a cup." The words dropped into Edward like a pebble into water. "Hold a cup," he repeated, caught between confusion and challenge. "Yes, a cup. Not an idea, not a metaphor, but a cup. Right here." The master's tone was light, as though telling a small anecdote. "Do you follow? Everything begins with the smallest thing." A young disciple brought in a wooden tray, upon it a plain cup and a clay teapot. Steam curled upward, carrying the fragrance of tea. "Take the cup," the master instructed. Edward carefully lifted it, his palm tense. The cup was warm, its surface breathing faint vapor. In that instant, his theories dissolved. Only the cup and his hand remained. A strange sensation, not an object to critique, but something presented for him to experience. He drew a breath, holding the cup with deliberate formality, as though to prove he was still a scholar. The master watched him quietly, then spoke with the ease of recounting weather. "I knew a man once who searched for everything in books. He said, 'I know every definition, but I don't know what a teacup is.' He drank, then wrote essays. Finally he died. And they asked him, 'Did you know what a teacup was?' All his words remained, but he had missed the taste." The master closed his eyes briefly, letting Edward sink into the story. Edward forced a smile, hearing his own reflection in that parable. But perhaps he only lacked the skill to be with the cup. "Isn't Zen about training that skill?" "You think of skill as a tool," the master replied. "Useful for work, but not enough for awakening. I could give you tools, yes, methods. But if you come with a cup already full of ideas, can I pour anything more into it?" Edward fell silent. The question struck at his deepest belief, that more knowledge leads to greater understanding. He had always thought that collecting data would eventually reveal truth's shape. Now, the master's words pulled that belief into doubt. He stared into the cup, and in its empty surface felt his own inner crowding mirrored back at him. The master rose and circled the table, his eyes scanning Edward as though reading a secret map. "You traveled far to find me," he said, "but the true path is not out there. It begins with something simple, knowing what you hold, and whether your hand is already full." Edward longed to argue, to ask, to analyze, but the old man's voice carried no command, only the weight of lived truth. Outside, the rain tapped steadily, like the ticking of an unseen clock. "How long will you stay?" the master asked, as if speaking of weather. "As long as it takes to understand," Edward replied. Realizing too late, he still framed his answer as a scholar. "I hope for a meeting, a lesson, I don't know how long." The master smiled, as if laying Edward's words gently beside a folded paper. "Tomorrow I'll have work. Today I am free. Will you wait until I prepare the tea?" Edward felt a fragile thread of hope, but also a challenge. Waiting, did it mean anticipating instruction, or was waiting itself the lesson? "I will," he said. The disciple bowed and drew the curtain, signaling the moment's pause. The master turned toward the window, watching the rain. His voice was soft, almost to himself. "When the cup is already full, what more can you pour?" Edward opened his mouth, ready with a reasoned reply. But his mind filled instead with an image, a brimming cup, tea spilling over, drops falling like unstoppable thoughts. He stood before a thin line between knowledge and experience. And then the master rose, walked to the table, and reached for the teapot. Edward's gaze locked onto the gesture. In that instant, every theory, every annotation he had ever written fell silent, giving way to the simplest of acts, pouring tea. Something ordinary, yet charged with a strangeness he could not name. The story had just begun to unfold, when it stopped, like a curtain half drawn. Chapter 2. Words without pause, tea without edge. Edward adjusted his posture, his eyes glowing as though everything he had studied for years had finally found its moment to be revealed. He had prepared for this meeting throughout his long journey from the west to the east, and deep inside, he believed he was carrying within his mind a treasure trove of knowledge to present before the Zen master. Master, Edward began, his voice trembling with excitement. I have spent decades reading Eastern scriptures. I compared Laozi with Heraclitus, set Confucius alongside Socrates, and I discovered that Zen has many parallels with Western existential philosophy. Kierkegaard called it the anxiety of existence. Heidegger spoke of being and nothingness. I see all of this as resonating with the very intuition of Zen. His words grew faster, pouring out like a rushing waterfall. Every name, every concept he cited was arranged like bricks, stacked into a towering castle of scholarship. He believed that, with such erudition, he could prove to the Eastern master that he truly understood Zen. Meanwhile, the Zen master sat silently, his gaze serene, his face betraying no reaction except for the faintest of smiles. He lifted the teapot with his right hand, tilted his wrist slightly, and let the golden stream of tea flow steadily into the cup before Edward. Freud argued that the human mind is governed by the unconscious. Edward continued eagerly. And Jung spoke of the collective unconscious. I think Zen can be understood as a direct approach to that depth. Do you agree, Master? And then there is Wittgenstein, who said the limits of language are the limits of our world. If Zen transcends words, is it not then the very expansion of existence itself? The tea kept flowing. The cup filled, its surface trembling under the continuous stream. But Edward was oblivious. I have also studied modern neuroscience. He pressed on, his voice rising. Research into the brain during meditation. Scientists measured brainwaves, showing decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the very seat of analytical thinking. Isn't that scientific proof that Zen is a distinct biological state? And if science has proven it, then surely we can systematize Zen into a universal method for all humanity. The first drops of tea began to spill over the rim, falling onto Edward's fingers. He flinched slightly, but in his rush to continue, he only wiped his hand quickly and went on. I have practiced many methods of meditation, Edward said, his eyes gleaming with determination, from Vipassana to Hindu meditative traditions to yoga. But perhaps Zen Buddhism of Japan is the most direct, the most essential path. With your guidance, Master, I believe I could compose a grand comparative work, a bridge between East and West, showing the entire world that the tea kept spilling, dripping onto the wooden table in shining beads. A small puddle spread across the surface, but the master's hand remained calm, his pouring unbroken. Edward's voice carried on, swelling almost to the point of drowning out the rain falling beyond the eaves. He invoked theology, citing Augustine, then Thomas Aquinas. He compared Zen to Christian mysticism, to the silent rapture of hermits. He believed he was building a fortress of reasoning that no one could refute. But through it all, the quiet sound of tea pouring persisted, slow and steady, like an invisible background song. The cup had long been full. Now the tea soaked Edward's hand and seeped into his sleeve. The warm fragrance of tea spread through the air, mingling with the rain, creating an uncanny silence. Edward began to grow uneasy. He frowned, his words faltering. The image of the overflowing cup before him crept into his mind like an uninvited question. He drew in a sharp breath, trying to keep his rhythm, but at last he could not hold back. He lifted his head, his voice breaking out. Master, don't you see? Chapter 3. The tea overflows, the scholar grows angry. Edward stopped mid-sentence, as though the entire world had been waiting for the final lines of a grand speech he had prepared. His words fell silent, not because he had run out of arguments, but because every thought in his mind collided with a single image, hot tea spilling over his hand, the cup already full yet still being poured into. The sharp intrusion of such an ordinary moment reduced all his theories to fragments, and that very intrusion lit a spark of anger in him, a frustration at being challenged by something so trivial. The Zen master still said nothing. He continued to tilt the pot, the stream of tea flowing like a thread stitching time itself. Each drop was like a proposition, a quiet beat. The tea touched the rim of the cup, then slipped over the edge, falling onto Edward's fingers. A thin trail soaked his sleeve, seeping into the fabric of his shirt. No one in the tea room spoke. The sounds of rain, pouring tea, and Edward's pounding heart overlapped into a taut silence. He had come here seeking answers, believing himself ready to prove his preparation. But this silent act, pouring without pause, was like a mirror reflecting everything he had not anticipated, the futility of theory when faced with a simple, undeniable reality. Edward clung desperately to the fortress of words he had built through the years. Drawing in a breath, he tried to hold his tone steady. "Master," he said with strained formality, "I understand that practice and direct experience are important. But if you reject analysis, if you reject reasoning, how can we ever pass this down to future generations? If everything is only personal experience, never to be articulated, then all science and philosophy will vanish." His voice pressed hard, as though demanding recognition. The master's hands moved as though playing a silent piece of music. He poured again, the stream unbroken. Tea flooded over the rim, trickling across the wooden table, spreading into a small, glistening puddle. Edward's face flushed with heat. Why did such a simple act unsettle him so deeply? Had he overestimated the strength of his intellectual armor? Could all his years of preparation be rendered powerless by the sight of a cup? "You're making a mess of my clothes," Edward snapped. "Can't you see? The cup is already full. The tea is spilling everywhere. Why won't you stop? If your aim is to teach, why leave things like this?" His voice carried accusation, frustration, even humiliation. The Zen master gently set the pot down. He did not look away, nor did he meet Edward's anger with defiance. Instead, he picked up a small cloth, dabbed at the spill, and laid the cloth aside. Then he lifted his gaze, calm and unhurried, his eyes carrying no judgment, only a quiet invitation. "I did not keep pouring to wet your sleeve," the master said softly. "I poured so that you might see what happens when something is already full, yet more is forced in." He paused, giving Edward time to feel the weight of each word. "You understood it not through theory, but through sensation." Edward let out a harsh, brittle laugh. "But master, this is absurd. I've devoted my life to study, to comparing systems, to building knowledge, and now you tell me all of it is undone by watching a teacup? How can a lifetime of scholarship be dismissed by a trivial act?" His words were sharp, but his voice quivered with unease. The master smiled faintly, his gaze undisturbed. "Not dismissed," he replied. "But before we add more, should we not recognize whether the cup is already full? Otherwise, no matter what is poured, it will only overflow." His tone was not scolding, not boastful. It was simply an open door, left ajar. A chill coursed through Edward. The words struck at his weakest point, the belief that more knowledge always meant better. He had spent his life accumulating, expanding, proving. Now, the question turned inward. Was any of it useful if he never let go of what he already clutched? His anger deepened, but it was no longer just about the wet sleeve or the tea. It was about the challenge, the exposure, the sense that his identity, scholar, philosopher, intellectual, was under quiet assault. The fortress of his knowledge now showed its cracks. "You're mocking me," he shouted, his voice raw with both pride and desperation. "You invited me here only to play a childish trick. I came to learn, not to be humiliated." His eyes blazed, part wounded ego, part honest plea for meaning. The tea room fell silent again. Rain tapped steadily outside. The young disciple by the wall held his breath, lips pressed shut as though guarding a secret. The master closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, looking deep into Edward's face as if reading a long story within him. "You came to learn," the master said, "but it seems you carry more than just an empty cup." Edward sprang to his feet, his hand trembling. And if I don't want to empty it, he demanded, if I believe all of this, all I've studied, is who I am, then how can I let go? His voice rang with defiance, but beneath it lay a trace of fear. The master tilted his head gently, his tone even quieter than before. Are you willing to set the cup down? It was not a command, but an invitation, a test disguised as a question. Edward froze. Two forces pulled at him, one to cling tighter, to prove his worth, the other, faint and fragile, whispering that perhaps he must let go. Sweat formed at his temples. His hand closed around the teacup, gripping it as if it were his very identity. Then, in a sudden burst of impulse, Edward reached for the teapot itself, seizing the spout as if to stop the flow. Heat scorched his fingers, steam coiled around his wrist. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. But the master did not resist. He did not pull the pot away. He simply looked into Edward's eyes, not with anger, but with an expectant calm, waiting to see what would emerge, whether from Edward's action or from the realization behind it. Edward felt the weight of the teapot in his hand, its heat biting into his skin. At that very moment, all the theories, all the names, all the systems he had rehearsed fell silent. He stood at the edge of a choice, to hold on or to release. And it was at that suspended instant, with the room holding its breath, that the chapter ends. Chapter 4. The result, the full cup and the gentle smile. The tea room fell silent, thick as a heavy drape, as Edward's hand clutched the teapot's handle, steam curling around his wrist. Every movement seemed to slow. The rain outside sounded distant. The drip of tea on the wooden table ticked like the faint measure of a clock. His eyes were fixed on the pot, as if by gripping it tightly enough, he could cut off the rising shame. The shame that everything he had been so proud of was now being exposed under the light of a simple, ordinary act. The Zen master lowered his hand, rose calmly, and walked toward Edward without haste. A faint smile lingered on his lips, not mockery, nor pity, but the smile of someone who had seen this moment long before it arrived. Bowing slightly, his voice warm and steady, he said, like this cup, you are filled with opinions and thoughts. How can I show you Zen? The words dropped like a stone into a still pond. Edward heard them echo in his ear, each syllable, reflecting the pages, the lectures, the discussions he had so carefully built around himself. He wanted to argue, to defend the idea that knowledge was still the path, that logic and evidence could lead to deep understanding. But the master's words asked for no debate. They opened a bare space Edward had never dared to confront. How could anything new be received when he was already overflowing? The Zen master sat opposite him, his hands resting gently on his knees. His voice continued, soft and measured, as if recounting something that had long since passed. I have met many who carried heavier suitcases of knowledge than their travel bags. They came, they read, they analyzed, they compared. They knew the names of the patriarchs, recited the words of great teachers. But when I offered them a cup of tea, they held it with hands already too full. How could I pour a single drop into what was already brimming? The word pour lingered like an unspoken challenge. Edward hesitated, searching for footholds in the conversation. But master, he finally replied, his voice still strained, I came here to learn. If I must discard what I have, then how can I bring anything back to the world? I have responsibilities, to readers, to students. I can't just throw it all away. The master nodded, his eyes filled with both understanding and calm. Responsibility is good, but there is a difference between carrying and being burdened. Do you carry knowledge, or do you use it as a fence to protect yourself? When the fence grows too high, it blocks out the sky. When too heavy, you cannot walk forward. He fell silent, allowing the words to settle in the air. The young disciple near the doorway quietly lifted a cloth, bowing, like one witnessing a ceremony, rather than a debate. Inside Edward's mind, images surged, nights spent writing, the applause of conferences, the published works bearing his name. His proud fortress of knowledge suddenly revealed itself as a chain. The weight of it stirred bitterness, and the bitterness twisted into fear. The master's gaze was steady, voice as gentle as flowing water. You came to learn Zen. But first, ask yourself, are you here to prove something, or to live differently? Edward swallowed hard. He wanted to say that his work had always been about transformation, about contributing, about understanding. But the words sounded fragile beside the simplicity of that question. The silence in the room grew heavier and lighter at once. Heavy with what was unsaid, light with the opening of a door, the admission that not everything can be solved by theory. The master stood, took the cup Edward still clung to, and placed it on the wet table. He did not snatch it, nor explain further. He simply tilted the cup, letting the tea spill drop by drop onto the floor, returning to the earth. The small act was itself an answer. Safety is not always in holding on. Sometimes, it is in letting what is excess flow away. Edward watched the tea run, heard its soft patter on the ground, and felt something stir, not wounded pride this time, but a fragile remembrance of what had been forgotten. "I am not taking away your achievements," the master said as he set the cup down. "I am not denying your work, your study, or your life's efforts. I am only showing you this. Before you ask if there is space. You may accumulate forever, but if you never set anything down, it becomes nothing but a weary load." His smile was kind, almost consoling. Edward felt torn apart inside. The image of the emptying cup rang like a bell. He remembered basking in applause, dazzling audiences with his eloquence. Perhaps, he thought, those claps had frozen something inside him, the part that once knew silence, listening, surrender. The Zen master stepped closer, resting a light hand on his shoulder, a gesture at once intimate and solemn. "I will not teach you with more theory. I can only bring you to a place to see. If you want to enter, you must answer one thing. Will you set it down?" His eyes closed for a breath, then opened, unwavering. Setting down is not merely physical. It is giving up the belief that you must always have the answer. Edward said nothing. The rain played its rhythm, each drop adding to the weight of the moment. In his mind, a parade of faces, students, journalists, readers, flashed by. All the questions, all the expectations. He could see his reputation, built like a paper statue, trembling at the slightest breeze. Could he really let it go? Slowly, his hand released the pot's handle. Steam had reddened the skin, leaving a small blister, but the pain was muted compared to another, the fear of losing the self he had built. The disciple watched him closely, eyes filled with a quiet mix of curiosity and compassion, as if recognizing this as a turning point in the scholar's journey. Edward glanced at the cup, then at the spilled tea. His voice cracked as he asked, "How? How will I know when to set it down?" The question was not so much a demand for method, but the cry of a soul searching for direction. The master's smile grew mischievous, yet tender. "When you realize your backyard is cluttered with too many things, you will know. But I will not tell you when. Instead, I give you a small challenge. Stay here a few days, with no books. Let your hands do the work your mouth usually does." He paused, waiting for a response. Edward's heart pounded. Fear pressed in, yet beneath it was something else, a quiet, strange stirring. A curiosity about what it would be like to live by hand instead of by words. But then came the familiar tug of responsibility, of contracts, of reputation. One part of him longed to escape back to safety. Another, faint but persistent, longed to stay. Just as Edward opened his mouth to respond, a knock sounded at the door. Not loud, but clear, like an intrusion from another world. The disciple bowed and moved to open it. Light spilled in from the corridor, cutting across the fragile stillness of the tea room. The Zen master remained silent, his gaze soft but steady, waiting to see what Edward would choose, words or action, reputation or emptiness. Edward's hand trembled as it brushed the rim of the emptied cup. His answer caught in his throat, and as the door creaked open, time seemed to hold its breath, leaving the question hanging. Would he sigh, set it down, or walk away? Chapter 5. Laughter and the Deeper Truth. The sound of the tea dripping onto the wooden floor echoed faintly in the small room. The silence after the master's words seemed to expand, filling every corner. The scholar sat frozen, his hands clenched. His face still flushed from frustration, but his eyes, those sharp, restless eyes, now wavered. The master's smile did not fade. He looked at the scholar as one might look at a child who has been too eager, too anxious to prove himself. His words, gentle yet piercing, lingered in the air. Just like this cup, you are already full of your own ideas and conclusions. How could I possibly show you Zen unless you first empty yourself? At that moment, the scholar's stern expression cracked. His lips twitched, and a laugh slipped out. At first, it was awkward, almost forced, as if he were trying to cover his embarrassment. But then, the laugh grew louder, more genuine, rising and echoing within the quiet room until it turned into hearty, liberating laughter. The master simply continued, smiling, watching the man's reaction with serene eyes, as though the laughter itself was already the beginning of understanding. The tension that had built up since their meeting now dissolved into a strange lightness. The scholar wiped the corner of his eyes, still chuckling. How ironic, he said, shaking his head. I traveled across oceans, filled my notebooks with questions, only to realize I carried with me nothing but noise. And here, in one teacup, you have given me the answer I did not expect. The master replied softly, his voice calm and rhythmic like a breeze brushing through bamboo. Zen cannot be placed into a mind that clings to itself. Let go, even just for a moment, and you will see what has always been present. The scholar leaned back, his body finally relaxing. For the first time, he was not preparing the next argument, not rushing to the next explanation. He was simply sitting, breathing, listening. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was alive. Then, almost instinctively, the scholar looked down at the puddle of tea still spreading across the table. He watched how it reflected the dim light, how the liquid shimmered before seeping away. A strange awareness flickered in his heart, simple, yet profound. He murmured, more to himself than to the master. Perhaps, to learn is not to add more, but to remove. The master closed his eyes and nodded ever so slightly. The laughter had ended, but its echo still danced within the scholar's chest. What remained was a space he had never felt before, open, unburdened, ready. And in that space, for the first time, the journey of Zen truly began. But little did the scholar know, this was only the beginning of many paradoxes that awaited him, lessons that would challenge not only his intellect, but the very core of how he lived his life. Story 2. The Sound of One Hand Clapping. Chapter 1. The Student and the Longing for Silence. Kai arrived at the monastery in the early morning, when dew still clung to the leaves. He walked through the old wooden gate, carrying a small bag, a worn notebook, and a head full of relentless questions. His wet shoes left faint marks on the stone path, each step echoing like the pulse of a heart searching for stillness. He was only 25, slender, yet his eyes shone so brightly that anyone who met them felt he was trying to pierce through every layer to reach the very core of things. You've come early, a deep, warm voice said behind him. A middle-aged disciple in a faded robe had been standing there unnoticed. The master will receive visitors today, but you should wait in the guest room. Just do not make noise. He bowed briefly, his words simple yet sincere. Kai nodded, his heart caught between eagerness and hesitation, because he knew what he was searching for, though not the form in which it might come. On his journey, Kai had devoured countless translations, burning with the desire to awaken, like the figures in stories. People who abandoned everything, sat down, and suddenly saw with clarity. He had read of impermanence, non-self, of letting go. Yet before coming here, doubt still gnawed at him. Was enlightenment truly as described in books, or merely a romanticized version of suffering? More than that, he longed for something practical, a way to stop his mind from spinning endlessly, projecting futures, weaving regrets of the past. The guest room was warm, a thin trail of tea smoke drifting in the air. On the windowsill lay several stacked books, some carved with old Chinese inscriptions, some translations of poetry. The disciple invited Kai to sit, placing before him a cup of tea and a small plate of baked sweets. Here, tea is not for taste, the disciple said softly, but to see if your mind is still. Kai smiled, though it was tinged with unease. What he longed for was not words about stillness, but the way to reach it. Soon, someone guided him into the main courtyard, where young monks swept leaves and tended the gardens. The swish of brooms, the light laughter between them, eased Kai's tension. A few greeted him in clumsy English. The monastery welcomed many international seekers. One asked, "Which master are you here for?" Kai replied, "Master Hoshi." At the sound of the name, their eyes flickered with both curiosity and caution. Master Hoshi speaks little. If you come to display knowledge, he will know. Kai felt struck in the chest. He hadn't come to boast, but to escape the noise that was drying his soul. When he was finally led into the tea room, Kai saw the Zen master. The man was past 60, his hair silver, his face plain yet radiant with a calm that compelled reverence. His eyes were not dazzling, but deep, as if they could see through veils of belief. He sat cross-legged before a low wooden table, his hands resting lightly on his knees, as though he had always been there. Kai knelt and bowed, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Master, I have come to seek the way," he said, his voice both formal and trembling. "I have read books, listened to talks, but my mind will not stop thinking. I wish to be shown how to end these endless scripts in my head, to," his fingers gripped the edge of his robe, "to be at peace." The master listened, not correcting, not praising, only watching. After a long pause, he asked, "How have you tried to stop?" Kai recounted sleepless nights of meditation, bringing attention back to his breath, experimenting with breathing techniques, counting, chanting mantras, even studying neuroscience to control brainwaves. He mentioned retreats in the West, thick books of scientific evidence, each attempt spoken with a hidden desperation to find a formula, a technique, to silence the noise. The master nodded occasionally, his eyes tracing the layers of the story. When Kai finished, he did not answer at once. Instead, he poured a small cup of tea for Kai and asked, "Why do you want silence?" The question was simple, but it sank deep. Kai stumbled for words. "Because I am tired. Because I feel I am losing the present moment. Because I want to know myself better." He exhaled. "And because I heard there are people who can truly see without thinking." The master smiled faintly, as though the response was expected. "Some come here out of curiosity, some out of necessity, some out of escape. Which one are you?" Kai flushed. He wanted to deny escape, but could not claim pure necessity either. The tangle of feelings made his heart pound like an untuned instrument. Throughout their conversation, the master shared short anecdotes of visitors who sought answers and left when none came, of a man who wrote extensively on Zen only to abandon his pen and sweep the courtyard, of a guest who wept upon hearing rain for the first time. Without analyzing it, they were not sermons, but stones placed along a path, for those who wished to walk, not for those who only wished to observe. Kai listened, his eyes sometimes widening, sometimes narrowing. Some stories pierced old folds in his mind. But one enemy remained, his need for certainty. He longed for a framework, a method, a theory with guaranteed results. To him, listening or stilling still seemed like equations awaiting solutions. The master set down his cup, his voice calm and unhurried. "I will not give you a manual, nor an exercise you can number and track. I will give you a riddle. If you are sincere, it will serve you. But if you came only to test ideas, you will be disappointed." Kai inhaled deeply, a subtle breeze lifting the dust in his chest. "And what is this riddle, master?" His voice trembled like someone climbing a steep hill. The master studied him for a moment, then said, "Not today. First, go outside. Sit under the old pine tree." Puzzled, Kai obeyed. The ground was cool beneath his feet, the scent of sap and damp earth rising around him. He sat for a moment, noticing the branches swaying, though his mind still hummed with inner chatter. When he returned, the master asked, "Did you notice the pine? Did you hear the sound of the leaves?" Kai admitted he barely remembered. The noise in his mind had drowned it out. The master nodded without judgment. "The other sound was you. Before the riddle, you must learn who the listener is." Kai, almost whispering, shared his childhood, a busy family, parents urging him to succeed, a father insisting that thinking is strength. Silence, to him, had always meant weakness. He confessed to nights haunted by imagined failures. "I am tired," he said softly. "I don't know how to let go." The master's gaze drifted into the air. Often, the root of clinging is fear, fear of losing, of ceasing to be someone. Yet it may be that this someone is what exhausts you. Letting go is not stripping everything away, but knowing what to keep and what to release. Their conversation lasted until noon. When Kai rose to leave, something within him felt lighter, not yet transformed, but open. Master, I am ready for the riddle, he said firmly. The master's eyes gleamed with a hidden smile. The riddle is not something I hand to you in words. I will give you a phrase that has silenced many and driven many mad. If you understand, be still. If you do not, I will know. A breeze lifted the curtain. The master poured 2 cups of tea, sliding one toward Kai. Drink, then rest. Tomorrow we speak again. He sipped, then murmured, almost to himself. Some riddles can only be heard when the heart is ready. Kai drank, the bittersweet taste spreading across his tongue. He felt as if an anchor had just been lowered into the ocean of his restlessness. As he stepped out, the master called after him. Do you know who it is that wants to silence the noise within you? Kai stopped, unable to answer. The master smiled knowingly. Tomorrow will tell. That night, Kai opened his worn notebook and wrote one line. Tomorrow, I will hear. Then he slept, half his mind racing to predict, the other half waiting unknowingly for a phrase that could change the very way he thought about thought. Chapter 2. Development, the koan and the invitation to silence. Kai sat back down, hands resting lightly on his thighs, eyes tracing the faint swirl of steam rising from his teacup. The air in the room was thick with the scent of pine and the faint humidity of the wooden floor. After a morning of listening and speaking, he felt as though a few layers of his restless thoughts had been trimmed away. Yet the stubborn part of him, the part demanding clear answers, a precise roadmap, remained intact. The Zen master rose, walked slowly around the low table, then returned to stand before Kai. The room seemed to hold its breath, pressing lightly on Kai's chest, as if even time itself had paused. If you truly wish to walk the path of awakening, the master said, his voice calm yet weighty, you must face a koan. Kai bowed, palms pressed together, eager yet apprehensive. Yes, master. Please, teach me. The master poured tea into a small clay cup. The aroma curled gently in the air, comforting yet provocative. Without looking up, he spoke again. Bring me the sound of one hand clapping. The word struck Kai like a sudden gust of wind. He froze, his mind scrambling. The master's eyes remained serene, closed as if he had not even spoken. The disciple's lips parted, but no words emerged. He searched the master's face for a hint, a clue, but the calm remained impenetrable. The sound of one hand, master? How is that possible? How can one hand clap? The master did not answer. He set the cup down, his movement fluid and deliberate. A drop of water from the window sill fell softly, punctuating the silence. Kai's heart pounded. He wanted clarity, a method, a step-by-step instruction, but all he had was this koan, an enigma, a challenge, a paradox that seemed to mock him. Master, should I analyze it? Meditate on the nature of sound? Or what should I do? Before he could finish, the master raised a single hand gently, signaling an end to further words. This is your koan. Bring me the sound of one hand. Until then, no further discussion is necessary. Kai bowed again, knees trembling. He wanted to press further, to demand a solution, but the firmness in the master's stillness stilled his tongue. The room seemed heavier now, the silence almost tangible. Birds chirped outside, their effortless melodies mocking him with their ease. His mind spun. He clenched his fists and stared at his own palms, imagining the sound that could emerge. The harder he tried to reason it out, the more it eluded him. The master's simple command had become a mirror reflecting all of Kai's obsession with control and explanation. If I cannot solve it with logic, he whispered, then what am I to do? The master's voice broke the tension softly, almost as if it had been there all along. You may try to reason, try to measure, try to force it into patterns. Many have done so. Some became frustrated, some even despaired. I will not guide your methods. I only present the challenge. Kai exhaled. The words carried both a warning and an invitation. The path could not be grasped by intellect alone. He would need to experience, to live with the koan, not dissect it with thought. Stepping outside into the courtyard, the breeze brushed against his face. The sunlight fractured through the pine trees, casting dancing patterns across the mossy stones. Kai walked slowly, feeling the uneven texture beneath his sandals. He noticed the simple chores of the monks around him. sweeping leaves, carrying water, tending the garden. Each ordinary movement seemed imbued with a quiet attentiveness he had never known. Kai's companion for the day, a younger monk named June, noticed his hesitation and smiled, a playful glint in his eyes. "What koan have you been given?" "A phrase." The sound of one hand clapping. "I do not understand," Kai admitted. June chuckled. "A warm, teasing sound. Many come here and struggle with that one. Some strike the air, some clap against pillows, some even strike the water. They all seek a sound. A few appear ridiculous. Some go mad. I once saw a man beat one hand on a tree until it turned red. Don't hurry. Work, sweep, carry water. Notice what happens when your hands are busy. Sometimes the sound is just the heart." Letting go, Kai felt a small tension ease in his chest. He began to work, sweeping the leaves, carrying buckets, tending the plants. Each motion, repetitive and simple, was a meditation in itself. The koan surfaced intermittently in his mind, but now its voice was less demanding, more like a whisper than a command. The afternoon faded. Kai tried small experiments, tapping a hand on the tree, clapping one hand against his chest, letting his palm brush the earth. Each attempt was free, unmeasured. He refused to hunt for the sound with expectation. The exercises were almost playful, yet they revealed the impossibility of controlling the experience. As dusk fell, monks gathered near the kitchen, cooking together, exchanging quiet laughter. An elder, Master Kuswa, spoke to Kai while stirring a pot. A disciple was given the same koan, the sound of one hand. Day after day, he struck at the air, at pillows, at shadows, even at others. Frustration consumed him. One morning, while sweeping the courtyard, the wind lifted a banner, causing it to brush against a post. A faint sound emerged. He stopped, listened, and in that moment he realized. It was not the sound of one hand, but he had ceased striving. In the stillness, he finally saw what needed to be seen. Kai listened intently, absorbing the story. There was no literal answer, only an illustration. The koan was not solved by technique, but by allowing experience to unfold naturally. Night came. Kai returned to his small room, the air cooler, the shadows long. He lit an incense stick, watching the smoke spiral into the quiet darkness. He opened his notebook and wrote one line. The sound of one hand clapping. How can I hear when my mouth constantly seeks to speak? The warm scent of incense seemed to weave a thin blanket around his restless mind. For the first time, he allowed the question to exist without attempting to conquer it. Before sleep, Kai repeated the koan silently in his heart, not seeking an answer, but letting the phrase float through him like a silent melody. Old habits of analysis tugged at him, yet he resisted. Tomorrow, I will let my hands act instead of my mind. I will not search for sound by listening, only by being. Chapter 3. The Struggle of Reason. Kai woke up on a chilly morning, the first light of dawn, streaming through the small window, illuminating his clenched hands. His mind was still filled with questions. What is the sound of one hand clapping? How can I hear a sound that does not exist? He sighed, deciding that today he would not only listen with his ears, but also attempt to use reason to tackle the koan the master had given him. He stepped into the courtyard, where morning dew still clung to the leaves, and began tapping his hand against the air, against wood, against the ground. Each attempt was made with full force and concentration, imagining the sound reverberating. But all he received was silence. No, this cannot be, Kai whispered to himself. There must be some way. He swung his hand, tapping hard on wooden posts, then slowly, trying every rhythm, every speed. His body tensed, his mind whirled, yet the clapping sound he sought never appeared. Kai returned to his room and opened the books on acoustics, philosophy, and the Zen notes he had collected. He read each line, each concept, attempting to piece them together into a logical system. Sound must have frequency, vibration, and resonance. Yet every theory dissolved when applied to the koan. Sound requires two surfaces to collide, he said. But I have only one hand, so how? How can one hand create a sound? He sighed, set the books aside, then rose and tried every possible method, tapping his shoulder, hitting the palm against a pillow, even waving his hand through the air while listening for echoes. Each action ended in failure. He felt trapped in an invisible maze. Every exit leading back to the same question. How does one hand clap? He looked out at the courtyard and saw the other disciples sweeping leaves, watering plants. Their movements were light and rhythmic, while he wrestled with reason and impatience. Kai realized that his efforts and desire for an answer were blocking him from seeing the essence of the problem. I will push logic to the limit, he said to himself. There must be a formula, a calculation, some acoustic reaction. He rummaged through his notes, drew diagrams, tried to simulate hand movements, even used objects as substitutes, hoping some equation would reveal the secret. Yet results remained empty. Each new theory hit the paradoxical boundary, leaving him exhausted and more confused. Why is there no answer? He exclaimed. The master said to simply listen. But how can I listen when everything around me is a question? The afternoon passed in a cycle of experimentation, failure, theory, disappointment, and effort. Kai continuously questioned, applied reason, tried every possible way to produce the sound. He began to feel his body tense, heart racing, mind spinning. The relentless effort left him nearly drained. I have gone too far with reason, he thought. But if I do not use reason, how am I to understand? Kai sat on a stone in the courtyard, inhaling deeply, letting his hands and body move naturally. But reason insisted on controlling every action, demanding that he produce the sound as the koan required. Each attempt intensified his frustration. Amid his fatigue, he noticed sunlight filtering through branches, leaves drifting gently, the wind rustling across the roof tiles. A fleeting thought arose. Perhaps he was seeking the sound externally instead of listening inwardly, yet his mind immediately dismissed it. No, it cannot just be perception. There must be a method, a clear result. He tried tapping at different rhythms, clapping in the air, on the ground, on his own body. Every action returned only silence. No sound, no answer, only mounting confusion and exhaustion. What am I to do now? He whispered. There must be some method. I cannot remain in frustration forever. Kai walked through the courtyard, observing the falling leaves, hearing the wind. Everything seemed ordinary, yet strangely alien, as if all things were smiling at his confusion. He realized he craved an external solution, yet the real question lay in how he listened and let go. Just then, a leaf fell lightly onto his hand, trembling and producing a faint sound. Kai flinched, lifting his hand and looking around. Nothing else moved, only the leaf and the pervasive silence. His heart raced. His mind whirled. A vague realization flickered. Could the sound of one hand clapping not be a physical sound, but an experience, a moment of acknowledging silence? Perhaps. I have misunderstood. The koan, he murmured. But if that is true, how can it be verified? He stood there, hand outstretched, staring into the empty space. The exhaustion mixed with curiosity, his body ready to collapse, yet his mind remained tense, caught between wind and light. Then, amid the tension, Kai heard a strange sound, not from his hand, not from the surroundings, but as if echoing from his own heart. He closed his eyes, breathing steadily, but the sound vanished instantly, leaving emptiness and a sensation both puzzling and curious. He stood motionless in the courtyard, not daring to move, sensing that this moment, when reason could not explain and sound could not be defined, was the turning point he had not yet fully understood. And then, as if all things waited together, a breeze passed through the courtyard, causing leaves to stir near his ear, yet it was unlike any sound he had heard before. Kai flinched, inhaled sharply, heart pounding, and at that precise moment, the chapter ends, leaving the question hanging in suspense, compelling the reader to turn immediately to Chapter 4 to discover what happens next. Chapter 4, Letting Go and Silence. Kai still sat in the courtyard, his hands tense, his heart pounding. The entire afternoon had passed in a cycle of trials, failures, theories, disappointment, and effort. Sweat drenched his brow, his body tight. Yet around him remained unchanging silence. Every action, every reasoning, brought no result, leaving only fatigue and confusion. Could it be? All of this is in vain, he whispered. But if I give up, will I ever understand? He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, letting his body fully relax. Each passing second made Kai realize that it was his desire for answers and his imposed reasoning that had blocked him from perceiving reality. He began to pay attention to his body, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the gentle wind, the rustling leaves. Perhaps I have been seeking in the wrong way, he murmured. Maybe the answer is not out there, but within me. He stood up, but did not move, allowing his body freedom, no longer controlling each action. He breathed deeply and slowly, feeling the rhythm of his breath, each pulse of his body. Reason still wanted to intervene, but he remained silent, observing without reacting. The sun tilted toward the west, light filtering through the leaves, casting shadows across the tiled courtyard. A leaf fell, trembling lightly, producing a tiny sound. Kai looked, but made no attempt to analyze it. He realized that before, he had clung too much to reasoning, too eagerly sought an answer, and had overlooked the presence of each passing moment. I must let go of everything, he whispered. Let go of reason, let go of questions, let go of desire itself. He sat down, hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes closed, breathing evenly. Exhaustion of both body and mind made him feel as if his body had dissolved, leaving only consciousness in the silence. He realized that it was precisely in this act of letting go that the answer began to appear, not as sound or logic, but as a direct experience. There is nothing left to do, he murmured. Only silence, only myself remains. Time seemed to stop. The surrounding space was silent but not empty. Every gust of wind, every trembling leaf, each breath of Kai blended into an invisible music he had never heard before. He understood that this silence was not absence, but full presence, where distinctions of right and wrong, desire and reason no longer existed. Kai opened his eyes, looking at the courtyard and the trees, realizing he had reached a different state. Not a concrete answer, but a new awareness. Understanding that letting go is the true way to hear. Yes, only when I let go, I can hear, he whispered. Not the sound, not reasoning, but complete perception. At that moment, from the courtyard gate, a disciple stepped out, his eyes filled with curiosity and worry. Master, can you tell me what just happened? The disciple asked. Kai smiled but did not answer. Immediately, he simply looked quietly toward the horizon, where the sunset began to dye the courtyard red. His silence made the air heavy yet powerful. All questions, all reasoning paused. In that moment, the rustling leaves, the wind, and the sunset merged, creating a suspenseful pause, leaving readers eager to know what would happen next, as Kai and the disciple continued to explore the true meaning of the sound of one hand clapping. Chapter 5. Hearing the sound of nothing. Kai sat on the mat in the courtyard, the soft sunset light filtering through the trees, casting shimmering streaks across the ground. The space was so quiet that every breath, every heartbeat, every falling leaf became vivid and alive. He realized his body was no longer tense, and his mind no longer pushed him. Everything he had longed for, sought after, and tested now remained only as full presence. Could it be? All my previous efforts were just to bring me to this moment, he whispered. And this moment is the answer I had never seen before. Kai slowly opened his eyes, but his gaze no longer searched or analyzed. Everything around him existed, yet was not divided into right or wrong, gain or loss, sound or silence. He understood that the sound of one hand clapping was not a physical sound, but the silence experienced deeply within the mind. This silence was not emptiness, but a subtle sound that only the heart could hear. I hear it, not with my ears, but with my mind, he whispered. No reasoning, no questions, only complete awareness remains. The disciple standing nearby observed carefully. He saw Kai saying nothing, yet the gaze and breathing of his teacher radiated a strange serenity. That silence carried a power that reason could not measure, a state that could only be felt through experience. Master, how can I hear this? The disciple murmured, his voice a mixture of curiosity and respect. No one can teach it with words, it must be felt. Kai replied, calm yet profound. Kai closed his eyes again, breathing slowly, sensing every rhythm of life around him, the wind, the rustling leaves, his own heartbeat. Everything blended into an invisible music, unordered, unstructured, simply pure presence. He realized that letting go, accepting, and embracing silence is the path to perceiving the true nature of all things and of oneself. Silence is not absence, he whispered. It is full presence, where everything exists simultaneously. Kai opened his eyes, looking toward the horizon, where the sunset painted the courtyard in shades of red and purple. He felt the pulse of life, the breathing of everything around, yet no longer sought to control or rationalize it. This stillness revealed a depth he had never known before, where each moment was complete and undivided by thought or concept. Yes, only by letting go can I truly hear, he whispered. Not the sound, not reasoning, but the direct experience of the mind. A gentle breeze stirred the nearby leaves. There was no longer chaos or sound to analyze, only the vivid sensation of the present. Kai smiled, releasing all desire and questions. He understood that this moment was precisely the sound of nothing he had long sought, an awareness of the essence of things and of his own mind. The disciple stood watching, trying to grasp it, but could only feel the overwhelming power of silence, realizing that learning Zen was not about understanding with reason, but experiencing with the mind. Everything that had occurred today, effort, failure, trial, led to this moment of realization, a state beyond sound and reasoning, leaving only pure stillness and profound perception. I understand now, Master, but this understanding cannot be spoken, it can only be felt, the disciple whispered. Exactly, words are limited. Only experience is truth, Kai replied, calm and deeply resonant. The sunset gradually faded, leaving the courtyard quieter than ever. Kai remained seated, breathing, feeling each rhythm of the world around him, blending with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He smiled, letting go of all expectations and questions, leaving in the space a lingering resonance, an experience of silence, surrender, and the sound of nothing within the mind, echoing in the reader's awareness long after the moment of full presence had arrived. Story 3. Where does the body go? Chapter 1. The last breath heard. The morning sunlight streamed through the wooden shutters of a small Zen monastery on the outskirts of Kyoto, highlighting the dust in the air and the robes of the monks. In the courtyard, the wind chimes tinkled softly on the bamboo posts, mingling with the rustling leaves, creating a lingering note of stillness. That day, disciples gathered around the main hall, where on a mat in the center, the elderly Western Zen master Jonathan, who had practiced Buddhism for over 40 years, sat leaning against a weathered wooden pillar, eyes half closed, hands resting on his knees in a habitual pose. Liam, a young disciple from Ireland, stood by the window, trembling, his eyes red from sleeplessness. He had stayed awake all night, watching every breath of his master, afraid that even a moment of inattention would mean losing the last chance to see him. Master Jonathan was old, yet no one had expected that today would be his final day. People from nearby Japanese villages, along with a few Western disciples, had gathered, whispering stories of the master's gentle guidance, simple yet profound teachings, and tales of how he would help others fold their robes mindfully to cultivate peace of mind. Master, Liam whispered, his voice breaking. Mr. Hiroshi, an elderly lay practitioner, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Calm yourself, child. Master Jonathan has lived fully. Now we must do what remains. His tone was firm, grounding Liam in the present. But Liam could not hear him. His heart pounded, memories of the master's words flooding back. Do not cling to the self. All things are impermanent. Breathe fully in each moment. Once, these words had been guiding lights, but now, with the master gone, they burned inside him, leaving a raw emptiness. Master Jonathan had taught Liam to sit in silence under the bamboo every morning, to listen to the wind, the birds, and even his own heartbeat. Now, facing the cold body before him, Liam recalled every lesson he had never fully understood. A local child at the edge of the courtyard asked innocently, "Why isn't Master opening his eyes?" His mother smiled gently. "Those who are blessed depart peacefully." Her words offered some comfort, yet could not ease the grip of attachment pressing on Liam's heart. Mr. Hiroshi knelt, placing 2 fingers on the master's wrist, closing his eyes for a moment. Before speaking softly, he has stopped breathing. His voice acknowledged a truth long expected. Liam felt his chest tighten. He knelt, hands still clutching his master's wrist, trying to hold on to the lingering warmth. Disciples began scattering flowers and lighting incense, carefully folding the master's robes. Liam watched them, yet his heart felt hollow. He wanted to ask the question he had long avoided. Master Jonathan, when you leave, where do you go? But before the words could escape, a knock echoed from the monastery door. The door creaked open slightly, and a breeze carried the scent of earth and wildflowers inside. A young voice called from outside. Is anyone here? We want to hear Dharma. The voice was vibrant and carefree, unaware of the parting that had just occurred. The sound stirred something in Liam, igniting both alertness and confusion. He leaned closer to his master, trying to sense any remaining sign of life, eyes wide, straining to see through the cold body, seeking an answer. Then, he noticed something unusual. The master's lips curved faintly into a calm smile, as if to send a message that only the attentive could perceive. Liam felt his heart leap, a mixture of fear and anticipation. He drew a deep breath, preparing to ask the greatest question of his life. Master, where do you go when you die? The words had yet to leave his lips when sunlight poured through the window, casting long shadows on the floor around the master's body, making everything seem suspended in time. Liam realized that the answer to his doubts, his fears, might not come in the form he expected. Chapter 2. The disciple asks, Master, where do you go when you die? The small courtyard of the Zen monastery was heavy with silence. Liam still knelt beside Master Jonathan's body, hands clutching the cold wrist, feeling the veins as if they were a map of time, a final witness to all the years his master had lived and taught. His breath was heavy, yet deep inside, a burning question consumed every ordinary thought. Master, where do you go when you die? He exhaled slowly, then whispered, his voice trembling, as if afraid to break the stillness that enveloped him. Master, where do you go when you die? The words floated lightly like a feather, but felt unbearably heavy in his heart. Liam didn't know what he hoped for: reassurance, a glance, or simply a silent understanding from his master. The other disciples quietly folded the master's robes, scattered flowers, and lit incense. No one spoke. They looked at Liam with both reverence and sorrow, understanding that this question could not be answered with mere words. But Liam remained still, hands still on his master's wrist, as if holding on to even a fraction of that body would reveal the answer to his long-held doubts. I don't understand, Liam murmured, his voice choking. Why did you go? And where? His words echoed in the empty hall, mingling with the scent of incense and the morning sunlight filtering through the windows, creating a scene both serene and unsettling. A soft knock from the hallway startled him. Footsteps approached, and Elder Hiroshi came forward, placing a hand gently on Liam's shoulder. You seek answers in what is uncertain, he said warmly, yet without explanation. What Master Jonathan left behind is not something to cling to. It is for you to understand. Liam looked at him, eyes pleading. But if he is gone, where did he go, Master? I don't know how to face it. Did he really go? Anywhere. A moment of silence followed. Liam could hear only his own heartbeat and the faint crackle of incense. Then, he felt a subtle warmth, a trace of breath on his master's wrist. Though the body was cold, he glanced around. Other disciples were absorbed in rituals, leaving him alone with the burning question inside. He stood, stepping into the courtyard, where sunlight streamed across scattered dry leaves on the worn tiles. He tilted his head to the blue sky, taking a deep breath to calm himself, yet the question gnawed at him relentlessly. Master, where do you go when you die? In that moment, Liam recalled mornings spent under the bamboo with his master, listening to the wind, the birds, and his own heartbeat. The master often said, "Listen carefully, child. All things are impermanent, but if you cling, you will suffer." Before, these words were abstract teachings. Now, they were a dim light illuminating the depth of his inner turmoil. He returned to the mat beside the master, hands trembling as they touched the cold wrist. If there is no self, then where do you go? Liam whispered, voice merging with the wind outside. Fallen leaves, distant birdsong, and incense smoke swirled around him. Everything seemed to hold its breath, awaiting what was about to happen. A tear fell from Liam's cheek onto the mat. He gripped his master's hand, seeking whatever warmth remained, but only coldness remained. The world around him seemed to slow, silence stretching to the point where he could hear his own heartbeat. Then, suddenly, a faint smile appeared on the master's lips, as if conveying something. Liam rubbed his eyes in disbelief. The smile remained, serene, unhurried, like an unsolved mystery. "Master, where?" Liam uttered, but the question faltered, for he suddenly realized that the smile, the silence, seemed to contain an answer words could never convey. His heart raced with both anticipation and fear. He sensed that he was on the brink of discovering a profound truth, but didn't yet have the courage to face it. The breeze outside picked up, rustling the flowers and dust, flowing into the hall. Liam stood, looking toward the wind, watching the bamboo sway, and he felt as though his master's voice echoed from an unseen realm. A faint, gentle sound, yet laden with weight. "You will understand." Liam's voice caught in his throat, heart pounding. He knew the answer would not come easily, and what was about to unfold would open a deeper mystery, a turning point in his spiritual journey that he had never anticipated. He clutched his master's hand, preparing for the moment when he would have to face the truth of death and the truth of himself. Chapter 3. The teacher smiled. "I do not know." The morning wind blew through the bamboo outside the courtyard, carrying the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. Liam still knelt beside Teacher Jonathan's body, eyes wide, heart pounding as if it might leap from his chest. The question, "Teacher, where do you go when you die?" echoed relentlessly in his mind, like a persistent call that could not be silenced. Then, unexpectedly, a faint warmth passed over the teacher's wrist, making Liam feel a subtle vibration of life still lingering. He held his breath, listening. The teacher's lips curved slightly into a gentle but mysterious smile, leaving Liam momentarily stunned. "I do not know." The teacher spoke, softly, warmly, yet it felt as if the whole world had paused. Liam's eyes widened in disbelief. "Teacher, how can you not know? How can we possibly understand?" He took a step back, torn between fear and astonishment. Teacher Jonathan continued to smile, eyes half closed, voice soothing yet, each sound striking deep into the listener's heart. "When you were alive, did you ever know everything? And yet you asked me to know what happens after leaving the body." The other disciples stood quietly around, not daring to break the sacred space. Liam drew a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "But if you do not know, what are we to do? How can we not be afraid?" His voice trembled. The fear seemed to swallow all reason. The teacher closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Do you not see? Fear, attachment, these are what create suffering. I do not know, because I have never clung to the self. I carry nothing when I depart, and if you cling, you will bind yourself." Liam felt his heart tighten painfully. Everything he once thought certain suddenly blurred. He recalled mornings spent under the bamboo, listening to the teacher speak of no self, impermanence, and the gentle lightness of a mind unburdened by attachment. Before, these words were abstract teachings, but now, in the presence of death, they became a mysterious answer he had to experience for himself. "But teacher, how can we understand this?" Liam finally whispered, voice shaking. The question floated in the space, no longer just curiosity, but a desperate desire to find the root of his fear. The teacher smiled softly, not to answer, but to awaken an emptiness within the listener that needed to be filled from within. "I do not know, my child, but you will see. When you stop clinging, when you stop seeking answers outside, everything will reveal itself." Liam gazed at that smile, heart filled with both fear and curiosity. He realized this was not the time to seek answers from the teacher, but the time to step inside his own mind, to face the fears and attachments he had never acknowledged. He stood, taking a deep breath, looking around the monastery courtyard, fallen leaves scattered, distant birds calling, sunlight filtering through the bamboo, casting patterns on the old tiles. Everything seemed ordinary, yet extraordinary at the same time, like a fragment of an unsolved question. He walked quietly around the teacher's mat, lightly touching the small offering bowl, lifting a fallen flower, sensing the fragility of life. I do not know. The teacher's words echoed in his mind, not merely an answer, but an invitation to step into the mystery of his own being. Then, a strange sound came from the hallway. The wind, or someone's footsteps. Liam could not tell, but it pulled him out of his thoughts and stirred a subtle unease. He realized that the next answer would not come from the teacher's smile or words, but from what he was willing to experience within his own heart. Liam stood still in the courtyard, heart racing, eyes following the swaying bamboo. He understood that the answer he sought would not appear in the usual way, and that moment, with the teacher's mysterious smile still lingering, was the doorway to the next chapter, where he would confront the truth about the self and the attachments that had bound his mind for so long. The wind suddenly strengthened, scattering dust and petals across the courtyard. Liam closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling each heartbeat and each breath. He knew that the next step would lead him into an experience he had never imagined, where the answer would not come from outside, but from letting go within. And in that moment, the teacher's smile remained on his lips, a mystery unresolved, urging Liam to move forward into the next chapter, where all doubts would begin to unfold. Chapter 4, When the Self No Longer Exists. The late afternoon sunlight bathed the monastery courtyard in gold, filtering through the bamboo leaves and casting patterns on the worn tiles, creating a space that felt both tranquil and mysterious. Liam stood before Teacher Jonathan's mat, eyes fixed on the gentle yet enigmatic smile on the teacher's lips. The question that had tormented him earlier surged anew in his mind. Why doesn't the teacher know? Teacher, why don't you know? Liam's voice trembled, as if even the question feared, breaking the silence that enveloped the courtyard. Teacher Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, speaking with a calm, warm tone. Each word fell like a droplet into a still pond. My child, when I was alive, I never clung to the idea of a self. When I die, where would I carry what does not even exist? Liam staggered, heart pounding with a mix of astonishment and confusion. But, if that's so, how are we supposed to understand? He took a step back, hands shaking as they lightly touched the teacher's, seeking an anchor in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. Teacher Jonathan continued to smile, eyes gazing into a space beyond the visible. Do you see, child? Clinging to the self, to this I you call yourself, is what keeps the mind drifting in fear. An endless thought. I carry nothing, so why should you worry about where I go? Liam lowered his head, contemplating. The mornings spent with the teacher under the bamboo, listening to the wind, the birds, and the rhythm of his own breath, now returned vividly in his mind. Before, the teachings on no self and impermanence were abstract, theoretical. Now, facing death, they shone with profound clarity. But, teacher, if there is no self, then, how can we be free from fear? Liam whispered, voice choked, eyes brimming with tears. His question hung in the air, mingling with the faint fragrance of incense, like a plea directed at a deeper truth he had never touched. Teacher Jonathan smiled, but it was not a smile that answered. It was a smile that opened a space within Liam, a space for him to explore for himself. I do not know, but you will see. When you stop clinging, when you cease seeking answers outside, everything will reveal itself. Only when you let go will you discover true freedom. Liam stood silently. He realized that the answer would not come from the teacher, but from facing his own fear, from looking directly into his mind, where the attachments to the self had bound him for so many years. He stepped into the courtyard, observing the sunlight glittering on the falling leaves, distant bird song, and the gentle sway of the wind. Ordinary and extraordinary coexisted, yet to Liam, everything seemed focused around one profound question that had no immediate answer. What is the self, and what will be revealed when it is released? He returned to the teacher's mat, placing his hand on the small offering bowl, lifting a fallen flower, feeling the fragility of life. When I no longer cling, what will become of me? He whispered, voice soft in the silent space. A stronger gust of wind swept through, scattering dust and petals across the courtyard, as if opening a secret passage. Liam closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, feeling each heartbeat and breath, realizing that the answer would not come from outside, but from the act of letting go within. The teacher's smile remained, gentle yet full of mystery, an unspoken invitation urging Liam to move forward into the final chapter, where he would confront the profound truth of the self and the attachments that had bound his mind for so long. Chapter 5. When the self is let go, the mind becomes still. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the monastery courtyard, casting golden hues on the worn tiles, mingling with the faint scent of incense. Liam stood in the middle of the courtyard, feeling empty, yet his mind overflowing with questions. Teacher Jonathan's words, "When I was alive, I never clung to the idea of a self. When I die, where would I carry what does not even exist?" echoed in his mind like a bell ringing through the depths of his consciousness. He took a deep breath, attempting to quiet the chaotic thoughts. Suddenly, everything became clear. It was attachment to the self, to the I within, that caused endless thinking, worry, and self-imprisonment. Liam sat on the mat, closing his eyes, listening to his own breath. The wind rustled through the bamboo, petals fell softly, and distant birdsong floated across the courtyard, forming a symphony of stillness. He realized that all anxieties, all fears, stemmed from clinging to the self, and that when one learns to let go, the mind is no longer pulled into ceaseless thought. Teacher, could it be that all our worries, ambitions, joys, and sorrows arise simply because we cling too tightly to the self? Liam whispered, his voice gentle, as if speaking more to himself than to the teacher. Silence filled the courtyard, yet Teacher Jonathan's smile lingered in Liam's heart, reminding him that letting go is not loss, but the opening of a space where the mind is free, no longer trapped by endless notions of the self. Liam opened his eyes, looking around the courtyard. Falling leaves, the last rays of sunlight, the wind through the bamboo, all seemed alive, yet no longer disturbed his mind. For the first time, he felt that space, a place where attachment no longer existed, where thoughts no longer controlled him, and where true stillness appeared. He remembered mornings with the teacher, under the bamboo, eyes closed, breathing slowly, with the gentle teaching. Truth is not out there, but in knowing how to let go. Now, those words shone like light piercing the night, illuminating Liam's soul. In that moment, he experienced a miracle. No questions about the self, no fear of death or where the teacher would go. Everything merged together like water flowing silently through the mountains, peaceful yet profound. He stood, walking slowly across the courtyard, fingers brushing fallen petals, feeling the fragility of life. He realized that it was not enough to study the theory of no self. One must directly experience letting go to truly feel the mind's lightness, freedom, and release from the invisible chains of the self. Liam stopped, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply. He noticed a state he had never known before. Silence was no longer empty, but full of energy. Thoughts that had once exhausted and worried him now floated like clouds across a vast sky, present, yet unattached. A bird called from afar, the wind rustled through the bamboo, and in that moment, Liam knew that the journey of letting go had only just begun. His heart trembled in a strange, excited rhythm, preparing for a deeper experience, where human attachments would be illuminated, and every thought and every breath would become part of absolute freedom. Liam opened his eyes, seeing Teacher Jonathan's faint smile still lingering in his mind, and felt a mix of relief and anticipation. He knew that the next step would lead him to a new discovery, where truly letting go of the self would reveal mysteries he had never imagined. The wind still swayed the bamboo leaves. The golden sunset continued to bathe the courtyard, and Liam stood silently, waiting, ready to step into a new journey, one where excessive thinking would gradually cease, and the soul would finally be free. When the mind becomes light. In modern life, each of us faces countless pressures, from work, family, to the relationships around us. Endless thoughts, worries about the future, or regrets about the past can make the mind feel trapped in a cycle with no escape. In reality, Most of the stress we experience comes from thinking too much, a habit that seems ordinary but quietly controls our emotions and energy. Meditation in Buddhism is not a method that forces you to stop thinking, nor does it aim for emptiness or numbness. Instead, it is a gentle journey of self-discovery, helping you realize that thoughts and emotions are merely passing guests, and you do not need to cling to them. Through meditation, you learn to observe, recognize each thought and emotion, then gradually smile at them, and finally, let them go. As in the story of Liam and teacher Jonathan earlier, we see that clinging to the self, the notions of I and mine, is what keeps the mind drifting, worried, and exhausted. Meditation teaches us to face these attachments without judgment, without trying to control them, and simply allow them to pass like leaves carried away by the wind. In that way, the mind becomes light, and excessive thinking no longer weighs you down. In modern life, we encounter endless information, make hundreds of decisions daily, and endure pressures and expectations from every direction. Many of us experience tension, sleeplessness, or persistent fatigue, primarily because we overthink, worry about what hasn't happened, or dwell on the past. Meditation becomes a sanctuary for the soul, a place where you can breathe, observe, and learn to live in the present moment, instead of being dominated by the past or future. A crucial point to remember is that meditation does not force you to stop all thoughts. You do not need to throw away your mind or separate yourself from emotions. Instead, it teaches a gentle attitude: recognize, smile, and release. A soft smile at tangled thoughts, a deep breath acknowledging that all stress is temporary. This is how meditation liberates the mind, helping you live more freely and peacefully. If you dedicate just a few minutes each day to observe yourself, recognize your attachments, and gently let them go, you will notice that the mind is no longer a container filled with worry. You will experience inner stillness, and your decisions, actions, and emotions will flow more naturally and clearly. Meditation is a slow journey, not a race, not a destination to prove anything. It is a gentle reminder that you can smile at your worries and release them without losing yourself. When the mind becomes light, life feels clearer, relationships become harmonious, and your energy is renewed. Before we end, remember, meditation is not about stopping thought, but learning to let go skillfully and naturally. Try dedicating a few minutes each day to observe your breath, smile at yourself, and let your mind rest. Then you will discover freedom in every moment, and excessive thinking will no longer be a burden. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can explore more Buddhist stories and lessons together, helping the mind become lighter each day. Let these gentle moments of meditation become part of your journey of slowing down, releasing attachments, and enjoying true peace. Smile, take a deep breath, and begin the journey of letting go today. Each silent step, each slow breath, brings you closer to inner freedom and genuine tranquility.